My name is Joe K. Sturgeon. I was a U.S. Marine and I served in Korea. I was finally diagnosed in 1990 with fibromyalgia, and I'll get into the cause of that later. But it took 5 years for me to get a diagnosis, and it even took a law judge for Social Security to determine that I should get it. As we go along in these different video sections, I will give you more information, updating valuable websites so that you can check these things out yourself. Today we're going to talk about signs and symptoms, and these updates are going to be numerous references about signs and symptoms that will verify and document each thing I relate to you. And the list from Dr. Horowitz, which I've had for years, it's really quite unusual because the list he gave was extensive, but now I understand there's at least 80 autoimmune diseases that are going to pertain to what I talk about. You simply go to Google and search, and I'll give you the names of the things that I have researched, and you can check them out if you want. You can verify everything I say, and Dr. Horowitz's website is in here. Symptoms that he attributes to the mycoplasmas: chronic yeast infection, MS, AOS, polio, herpes genitalia, diabetes, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, Gulf War syndrome, hepatitis of the liver, paralysis, lymph node change, and peripheral nerve problems and headaches. Now this is only a minor list. This list was made some years ago when Dr. Horowitz was way ahead of everybody else on this, the cause of all these different things. Now the consensus is, from some of the research that I've looked at from the internet, there's over 80 of these autoimmune diseases that can be attributed to the mycoplasmas, and that's what we're going to be concerned with. And on the internet you can go to Google and look up MS and mycoplasmas, and in there it talks about mycoplasma pneumonia, and this is from the National Center for Biotechnology Information. Also, mycoplasmas, it said the title of this site is The Missing Link in Fatiguing Illnesses. And it says mycoplasmas are mysterious microorganisms that can play a major role. Chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia syndromes, multiple sclerosis, and Gulf War syndrome. Mycoplasma Gulf War illnesses. I have had one person come to me who had Gulf War syndrome and was discharged, but he had the mycoplasmas. And this is, it says here, why the mycoplasma and Lyme epidemics are being syndrome, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, and mycoplasmas. That's a good website to go to. Now this can be a reference to a lot of things. Another site I went to was AOS and mycoplasmas. And there's a lot of information. Each one of these sites at the bottom of the page will have, notice that there's at least 10 more pages about these things. Here's polio and mycoplasmas. And this came from Google. And then here's herpes genitalia and mycoplasmas. High prevalence of genital mycoplasmas among sexually transmitted diseases. Mycoplasmas commonly colonize the genital tracts of men and women, genital herpes, and then examined for lesions suggestive of these infections. Herpes simplex type 2 and mycoplasmas genitalia as risk. Another one is mycoplasma genitalium, Melbourne Sexual Health Care. That's who did this research. It says genital herpes, gonorrhea, mycoplasmas genitalium, syphilis, try something, and other things are caused by the mycoplasmas. Another one is this new STD, what you should know about mycoplasmas. It goes on and on. So you're looking at any kind of complications depending a lot on your DNA and the way you have lived and ate and drank water. Now we got diabetes and mycoplasmas. The missing link in fatiguing illness, mycoplasmas. Mycoplasma stealth pathogens. Rain tree nutrition is where that came from. Mycoplasma, the linking pathogen and neurosomatic diseases. Mycoplasma used to be very harmless until it was manipulated. Diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, and Wagner's. Mycoplasma falcon blanco. Mycoplasmas, stealth pathogens, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, diabetes, Crohn's disease. The list goes on and on. And again, you have 10 pages at least on each one of these websites. Now we have fibromyalgia and mycoplasmas. Is fibromyalgia caused by mycoplasma infection? In 1992, German study thyroid function was tested in 13 female patients with primary fibromyalgia syndrome, FMS. 10 healthy age match controls by intravenous injection of 400 micrograms of thyroton. Multiple sclerosis infections detected in blood of fibromyalgia syndrome among these were mycoplasmas tested positive in patients. Infections were detected. Another site, new treatments for chronic infections found in, and they go down here and talk about fibromyalgia syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, and Gulf War syndrome, and on and on. Mycoplasmas are important infections in Crohn's diseases. Mycoplasma infections in Crohn's diseases, fibromyalgia, etc. Fibromyalgia syndrome and Gulf War illness, it is now apparent mycoplasma infections, more than one species of mycoplasmas. That's something I didn't know about. But you go on the page for mycoplasmas and it'll give you pictures of several different species. And one doctor here is a Dr. Nicholson, who I have run into quite a bit in reports. Okay, here's one that's mycoplasma testing. I find out now that there are more tests, and I don't know anything about them, than what I will indicate in this video. Mycoplasma infections are found in patients with Gulf War syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalitis, and fibromyalgia and Lyme. Common mycoplasma is now weaponized pathogenic. And this is by an individual, and it's kind of a weird thing, but maybe they are. And now we'll go to chronic yeast infection and mycoplasmas. Mycoplasma genitalia as a sexually transmitted infection. Mycoplasma is sexually transmitted infection. Urethritis, salpingitis, and others. Autoimmune disease, Dr. Paul Beals, and I've run into his name. Yeast infections, chronic fatigue syndrome, may be an autoimmune disease caused by mycoplasmas or other chronic infection. Yeast infections, Dr. Gabe Mirkin on health, fitness, and what the cause is, yeast infections. Dr. James Haustein, how can intestinal bacteria get in the body? When a yeast infection, candida, becomes established, the yeast organisms, approximately 26% of individuals with chronic urticana hives, the proliferation of candida, and dangerous and anaerobic other things. Now here's another website I went to. Chronic fatigue syndrome and mycoplasmas. Much the same thing as fibromyalgia. Is the fatigue illness research by the Institute of Molecular Medicine. Mycoplasmas, a missing link in fatiguing illnesses, then it states mycoplasmas are mysterious microorganisms that can play a major role in these things. High prevalence of mycoplasma infections among, and this is done by the National Center of Biotechnology Information, mycoplasma infections among European chronic fatigue syndrome patients. Examine of 4 mycoplasma species in the blood of chronic illness. Multiple mycoplasma infections detected in blood of, and this is by the National Center of Biotechnology Information, And the study patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia syndrome were among those mycoplasma positive patients. Mycoplasma bacteria tied to chronic illness. Health articles. Chronic fatigue syndrome patients, around 70% had mycoplasma DNA in their bloodstream. A big problem that I can see, and it's prevalent in a lot of the information I have, that there's no way to get rid of the mycoplasma, which is wrong. I've seen a couple of websites that say there's a treatment. It doesn't say that you can get rid of it. And now we have Gulf War syndrome, and it's essentially the same thing as fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And now hepatitis of the liver and mycoplasmas. A case of acute hepatitis with mycoplasma pneumonia. Acute hepatitis due to mycoplasma, that's the second one. I believe it's the same company, yes. Mycoplasma pneumonia infection without lung involvement of liver and involvement with pneumonia, commonly acquired ammonia. Elevated serum saline levels and the possibility of liver involvement in mycoplasma pneumonia, secondary tumors of the liver cirrhosis, and steatosis hepatitis. Mycoplasma pneumonia associated acute hepatitis. Mycoplasma pneumonia is a major cause of respiratory infections, school-aged children. Mycoplasma pneumonia infection presenting as hepatitis, mycoplasma pneumonia, neutropenia, and several other things here. It's just prevalent. It seems to me like the mycoplasmas have and been in the past cause of so many different things. This is paralysis and mycoplasmas off the internet. I'll just read the titles of the different websites. Mycoplasma infections, body-last contagious causes. Bilateral facial nerve paralysis associated with mycoplasmas. Mycoplasma pneumonia causes symptoms and diagnosis of pneumonia. It's a contagious respiratory infection, which is a neurological disorder that can lead to paralysis and death. Mycoplasma pneumonia and Borrelia burgdorferi as causes. The causes of facial paralysis vary significantly in the literature, especially regarding what I just mentioned, and mycoplasma pneumonia in the same paragraph. Google Books result, and this talks about mycoplasma infections, although mycoplasma species, especially M, and ascending paralysis and stroke resulting from occlusion. Deaths increase with vaccine. Acute, that's not further on there. Now the next one I did was lymph node change in mycoplasmas. Now again, you can go to all these and get copies for yourself. It might pertain to what your diagnosis is. The big one here on this one is mycoplasmas infection, facts, information, and pictures. Mycoplasma infections, eye pain, muscle aches, joint stiffness, skin rash, swollen lymph nodes in the neck, and fever, changes in blood pressure and heart rate, and difficulty breathing. And this is, I believe, the last one, peripheral nerve damage, problems, headaches, and mycoplasmas. Chronic co-infections of Lyme disease. Now this is important. We happen to know a young lady back east, and we're going to try and get hold of her, who has Lyme disease, and I guess her life is terrible. There's a name here, Babesia palwasian versus Enchilada, tick paralysis, Rocky Mountain fever. After years of infection, peripheral neuropathy damage will be evident. Sharp, knife-like, and often behind the eyes type of headache. Transverse myelitis association diseases. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Several diseases may lead to transverse myelitis and should be investigated at the present with neurological symptoms such as TM and peripheral neuropathy. Mycoplasma pneumonia is a rare but important cause of transverse myelitis, headache, skin rashes, severe pain, joint pain, and myalgia, break bone fever. Full text: Clinical Infection Diseases by Oxford Journals. Mycoplasma pneumonia is a common cause of upper and lower respiratory tract. Small nerve fiber studies suggest new area in fibromyalgia. Small nerve neuropathy can cause many different types of pain, plus chronic fatigue, headaches, suggested chronic viruses, and even bacteria. Lyme, mycoplasma, it goes on and on. These are things that we have the answers to. And you can get it taken care of very easily, even by yourself. It's a self-help program that I present here. And even at that, you can take it to your doctor. Now, in this program, there's 3 stages. I call them recovery stages. You eliminate the mycoplasmas. We'll get into that, how you can get them out of the body. As a matter of fact, mycoplasmas are very difficult to get out of the body. And I have not heard of anything but the 2 things we talk about. One is a prescription medication, one is a natural medication. The best way that we have found that the doxycycline, which is a prescription, will not get mercury and aluminum out of the body. Our natural antibiotic, grapefruit seed extract liquid, will get mercury and aluminum out of the body. Once you get the mycoplasmas out, you need to rebuild the body. And that means you have to go on some kind of a good regimen, and it's going to be for life. That's your 3rd step, is a lifetime maintenance. You have to rebuild your body, and I am still doing that. You're subjected also, because of the immune system and the damage to your body, you can get other things along the way. Now, the medical tests that I know of for fibromyalgia, which means the mycoplasmas and all these other signs and symptoms, the first one is enzyme aminoassay. It's spelled ENZYME. Second word, AMMENO. Third word is ASSAY. The next one is gene tracking. GENE, and then tracking, TRACKING. The third one is polymerase chain reaction, spelled POLYMERASE. Next word, chain, CHAIN. Third word is reaction, REACTION. And then what I use is what I call applied kinesiology, which is using the body energy. Everybody has energy. And yet, if you talk to your energy, it'll tell you what you need to do about a lot of things. I won't say everything because I've run into some heart problems. What causes the fibromyalgia? I have found with me it was vaccinations, aluminum and mercury, secondhand cigarette smoke, and thyroid problems, and virus. The virus, I believe they're trying to refer to the mycoplasmas, which is actually a bacteria. Secondhand smoke has caused my wife some problems. She just recently had to take off a skin cancer, and the doctor informed us when I told him that what we do had corrected her DNA for cancer. He said, well, that's inside, this is outside. And the outside is caused by cigarette smoke, the sun, radiation. Now, we went in the doctor on me here just a week or so ago, and they called us today and said that I have a skin cancer, which is going to have to come off. Now, signs and symptoms include, here's a story here of a young lady. The pain intensified and became maddening. The doctor sent her to a physical therapist. After 1 session, she felt better. After 2, she felt worse. Next, a chiropractor, then an acupuncture, then a massage therapist, and others. It was always the same. Initial relief followed by more pain in more places, and after a few months, she recalls, I could barely move. Now, we've got the answer, but you have to know how to do what we're doing. Now, some of the signs of MS, I have had people come to me who hadn't been to a doctor, and they didn't have a diagnosis, but it's so easy to determine. Numbness and tingling, pins and needles in extremities, muscle weakness, abnormal fatigue, vision problems, blurred or double vision, intermittent blindness in one eye, poor coordination and balance, slurred speech, tremors, bladder and bowel dysfunction. And Dr. Rosenfeld, which we will mention several times in what I talk about, he says that he thought chronic fatigue was all in your head. However, there's one kind of fatigue, unlike any other, a bone-breaking tiredness that prevents you from getting out of bed in the morning, even after a good night's sleep. You continue to feel worn out no matter how much you rest. You can't work or play, and all you're able to do is vegetate at home. When you tell your doctor about it, he or she performs a thorough checkup, but the tests come back normal. The diagnosis, chronic fatigue. Again, he didn't know, and later on he'll make another statement. In fact, it's in this article. He says, I too used to be skeptical about chronic fatigue. I was sure it was all in the head, but I've changed my mind. I'm now convinced that it's a real disorder, probably due to some derangement of the immune system, possibly triggered by a still unidentified infection, viral or bacterial, or an allergy or hormonal imbalance. The test, after you have a physical and all the blood tests and everything, you should also ask for a careful search for microorganisms. Now, in my opinion, this is past time for the medical profession to acknowledge that, in fact, there is a cause of fibromyalgia and all these other signs and symptoms. Dr. Renfield suggests getting tested for microorganisms. Garth Nicholson, PhD, has been a strong proponent of the theory that chronic infection with tiny-sized bacteria called mycoplasmas could lead to the symptoms of fibromyalgia and on and on. And additionally, there is a very easy way to eliminate them, medically or naturally, although doctors claim there's no cure. I call mine to find the cause and recovery, because you always have a possibility of getting them again because of your DNA. I don't charge people. I've helped hundreds of people. Many have tried to meet with several doctors. I have tried to meet with several doctors and been told they do not have time for anything else and that there's no cure. Okay, what is life worth? Why must pain and suffering go on when it can be stopped very simply? Some people may experience complete recovery.